so let me set the scene for you. I'm in college in Maryland, trying to survive the chaos of classes and exams. Every Thursday night, a group of us from my program would hit up this dive bar near campus. It wasn't anything fancy, but they had karaoke, cheap drinks, and it was the perfect way to blow off steam after a long week. At first, it was great, but as the semester dragged on, the vibe at the bar got sketchy. We started noticing some strange characters showing up. Creepy older guys hitting on college girls who were clearly way too sober for their antics. Then this group of dudes started frequenting the place. These weren't your typical college guys. They were overly friendly in the weirdest way, completely sober, and way too pushy with some of my friends. One of the most bizarre encounters happened when one of these guys walked right up to us mid-conversation and casually asked if we wanted to buy cocaine. Yeah, you read that right. Flat out offered us cocaine. We obviously said no and tried to laugh it off, but from then on, the vibe was officially ruined. Fast forward to one particular Thursday night. We stayed until last call, which wasn't unusual, but also wasn't something we did every week. That night, I overheard one of the cocaine guys making some unsettling comments about wanting to find some college girls before the night was over. Not exactly comforting. So my friends and I decided to stick around to make sure our female friends got in their Uber safely. Once they were good to go, it was just me and two of my buddies heading home. It was about 2:40 a.m. when we started the walk back to our place. We'd only been walking for 5 minutes when I heard the scuff of shoes behind us. Turning around, I saw one of the shorter guys from the bar trailing us. He wasn't too close, so I brushed it off. Big mistake. A few minutes later, we heard him shout, "Hey! Wait up!" This time, he had a much taller friend with him. Instantly, I felt this knot of anxiety in my stomach. Something was off. We tried to ignore them and pick up the pace, but suddenly, the shorter guy stepped directly in front of us, blocking our path. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random encounter. The taller guy looked at us, almost sizing us up, and said, "You know there's a tax for walking out here this late, right?" We were stunned. Was this guy serious? Before we could even respond, the shorter one chimed in, $30 each right now. Now, being broke college students, we didn't have cash on us, and we told them that. The taller guy wasn't buying it. "Give us your wallets then," he said, stepping closer. We tried to play dumb, insisting we didn't have wallets either. But then the guy grabbed my friend by the shoulders, pointing to a nearby alley. "Guess you won't mind if we pat you down, huh?" At that point, my buddy had had enough. He shoved the guy's hands off and said firmly, "No, you're not doing that." What happened next? It felt like something out of a bad dream. The taller guy stepped forward and grabbed my friend, his hands tightening around his throat. My other friend, not wasting a second, rushed in to help, pushing the guy back. But before he could get control, the shorter guy jumped in, blocking his way, making things even more chaotic. And me? I couldn't move. I was completely frozen, my mind racing, but my body didn't respond. This was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. My friend, struggling under the pressure, managed to shout, "Run! Just go!" So I did. My heart was pounding, and I sprinted down the street without looking back. I could hear my friends following behind me, trying to catch up, and all I could hear from the taller guy was his shout, "Get back here!" But trust me, there was no way we were going to turn around. We didn't stop running until we were sure they weren't following us anymore. By the time we made it back to our place, gasping for breath, we locked ourselves in and just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. We called the cops immediately. They came, took our statements, and even drove us back to the area to check out what went down. They said they'd look into it, but months went by with no updates or follow-up. The one thing we could hold on to was knowing we had made sure our friends got home safe. When we got back, one of our roommates was still awake and handed us drinks to calm our nerves. It was the strangest kind of relief, surviving a situation that could have turned out a lot worse. And that bar? We never stepped foot in it again. Lesson learned. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, don't stick around to see how bad it can get.
All right, here's how it all went down. I was in a rough place back then, going through a horrible breakup that left me living alone and feeling pretty isolated. I didn't know many people in the area, so I turned to the internet to fill the silence. That's when I met this guy online. Let's call him Jake. Jake seemed nice enough, and as it turned out, he lived just a 30-minute walk from me. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up at a local pub. Excited but cautious, I told my friend, let's call her Sarah, about the plan. Sarah, being the more skeptical and street-smart one, insisted on tagging along. "What if he's an axe murderer?" she joked, but I could tell she was half serious. The next day, Sarah and I met Jake at the pub around lunchtime. It was a sunny summer day, and the beer garden was bustling with people. It felt safe, too public for anything sketchy to happen. The three of us hit it off, laughing and chatting as we took turns buying rounds of drinks. Time flew by. Afternoon turned into evening, the beers kept flowing, and we were getting tipsy. Jake went to grab another round, and that's the last thing I remember. The next morning, I woke up in my bed with a pounding headache, my face aching, and blood on my sheets. Confused and panicked, I stumbled to the mirror. My reflection was horrifying. I had a black eye, a split lip, and bruises all over my face. It looked like I'd been in a fight and lost badly. Trying to piece together what happened, I opened my bedroom door. That's when I saw Jake, lying naked on my couch like he owned the place. My heart dropped. I started yelling, demanding answers. Jake, surprisingly calm, told me that I had gotten blackout drunk the night before. According to him, I was slurring, stumbling, and eventually fell over a picnic bench, hitting my head. He claimed I refused help from anyone, so he heroically called a cab, brought me home, and stayed to look after me. I didn't remember any of this. Not a single moment. It didn't make sense. I'd had nights out before with more drinks than I had that day, and I never blacked out like this. But what else could I do? I was speechless, overwhelmed, and just sick. Jake stayed that morning, making himself at home while I struggled to process everything. By the afternoon, he suggested we head to his place for dinner to continue the date. I should have said no, but I was too frazzled and naive to push back. So I went along with it. Jake's house turned out to be a small trailer in a caravan park. It was cramped and unsettling, with an odd, suffocating vibe. He showed me around, and I ended up sitting awkwardly at the dining table while he cooked. Something felt off. The more I thought about the night before, the less it added up. Half distracted, I blurted out, "I feel like I was drugged." That set him off. Jake exploded, screaming that I was accusing him of something horrible. He ranted about how I was trying to ruin his life, even yelling something about being on parole, news to me. Turns out he had a history of domestic assault. He began smashing things, plates, a toaster, anything in reach. I froze, sitting a few feet away, unsure of what to do. When I tried to stand up and leave, he rushed toward me, shoving me hard. I lost my balance and fell to the ground, but before I could react, he started yelling at me, telling me I wasn't going anywhere. Panicking, I quickly got to my feet and sprinted down the narrow hallway, with him close behind. I ducked into a small room, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it. He pounded on the door, shouting insults, and I felt trapped with no escape. The banging eventually stopped, and I heard him move away, muttering to himself. Then came the sound of 3 loud thuds, like he was trying to force the door open. I braced myself, pushing hard against the door, hoping he would give up. Eventually, the noise stopped, and I heard the sound of the TV turning on in the other room. It was eerie, like nothing had happened at all. I waited quietly until I was sure the coast was clear. Slowly, I opened the door and tiptoed down the hall. The living room door was shut, and the house was strangely still. That's when I remembered the back door. Praying it wasn't locked, I crept over to it. Luckily, it wasn't. I slipped outside, carefully closing the door behind me, and then I ran. I didn't stop until I was far away from that place, my body shaking from adrenaline and fear. Eventually, I managed to find a payphone and called Sarah to come pick me up. She didn't ask any questions, and I didn't give her any details. All I wanted was to get home and block it all out. The next day, I found my phone, which I had left at home the night before, flooded with messages from Jake. Some were threatening, saying he'd take me out if he ever saw me again. Others were full of apologies, claiming he loved me and was sorry. I didn't hesitate. I deleted every single message. I never went to the police, and that's something I still regret. But at that moment, I just wanted to move on and forget it ever happened. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was to escape. It's a lesson I'll never forget. Always trust your instincts and never let anyone make you feel trapped.
It was one of the strangest, most unnerving nights of my life, one that still gives me chills whenever I think back on it. Sometimes I wonder if it even really happened, because it all felt so unreal. It was the mid-1990s. I was a single mom working a Saturday night bartending shift at a quiet little bar off the highway. This wasn't the kind of place that saw a lot of action on weekends. Most of our traffic came from the weekday after-work crowd. On Saturday nights, I was often alone or serving just a handful of customers. The bar wasn't near much of anything. It sat isolated along a frontage road, somewhere between the sprawling towns and affluent suburbs north of Chicago. On this particular night, the weather matched the eerie loneliness of the place. A raging thunderstorm was tearing through the sky, with rain lashing against the windows and lightning illuminating the parking lot in flashes. I was wiping down the counter, listening to the storm, when the door swung open and in walked a man. He looked like he just stepped out of a movie. Windswept blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a rugged, confident air about him. He wasn't dressed fancy, but something about him radiated presence. He sat down at the bar, the only customer in sight. I walked over to take his order, trying not to let my nervousness show. There was something off about him, nothing I could put my finger on, but I felt it in my gut. He ordered a drink, and I went to make it, distracted by the storm outside and the unsettling quiet of the bar. When I handed him the drink, I noticed he'd left two 25s on the counter. The drink was $2.50. Politely, I told him, "You're a quarter short." That's when he looked me dead in the eyes, his gaze cutting through me like a blade. With a calm, almost hypnotic tone, he said, "I'm Satan. Tell me what you really want. I can give you anything you desire. What is it that you truly want?" I froze. The air seemed heavier, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The storm outside felt like it was pounding in time with my heartbeat. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. Somehow, I managed to steady myself, even as my hands shook. I locked eyes with him, summoned every ounce of courage I had, and said, "What I really want is another quarter for your drink. And for you to stop being so weird and scary." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, an unnerving, knowing smile, slid the quarter across the counter, downed his drink, and walked out into the storm without another word. I stood there, heart pounding, watching the door swing shut behind him. The bar felt darker, emptier, like the air itself had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been tested, or tempted. Later that night, I had to close up alone, and let me tell you, I was on edge until the sun came up. Every creak of the building, every flash of lightning sent my heart racing. I didn't last much longer at that job. Seeing Satan once was plenty for me. But there's one detail I've never been able to forget. The pendant he was wearing. It was gold, intricately designed and shaped like an octopus. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but years later, I stumbled across stories about conspiracies and hidden symbols. The octopus, I learned, is often tied to secret societies and the Illuminati. This bar wasn't far from a wealthy Chicago suburb, the kind of place where money and power mingled in strange, unseen ways. I can't help but wonder now, who was he, really? Or worse, what was he?